some information on note structures here. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the Cornell system of note taking, but here it's on the screen an example for you. Regardless of the note structure that you use, we encourage that it be consistent. The structure and being consistent improves the ability for you to organize the information, learn it, and recall it at a later date. When information is taken in, and absorbed through learning in an organized and structured way, when you're asked to recall that information on exams, midterms, assignments, it's more likely to then come out onto the page, into your essay, etc., in an organized way. If we were to ask the question, where in your notes is X? Whether it's a friend who's maybe asking for notes or clarification on a topic, or if you're sitting in an appointment with a learning counselor and we were to ask, where can we find that concept in your notes? By having a structured and consistent framework, you're able to find that information quite quickly. We don't want it to be a stressful, time-consuming process to find that information. We really want it to be, an ease-filled, oh, yep, I know exactly where it is. Here, let's find it. One way to do that is by using the Cornell system. So you'll see that first column, it usually takes up about a third of the page. And that's where you're writing down those main concepts as you've looked at practice questions or learning outcomes, the summary of the textbook chapter, things like that. You're able to pull the main concepts and jot them down in that column 1 area. The area that's labeled number 2, or the record, that's where you're putting your notes down from lecture. I always encourage students to think, if you know that you have the textbook chapter, you may also have slide decks or, PowerPoint presentation notes from your professor. If you have that information, then the notes that you're taking down in that column 2 record area is the supplemental pieces, the key pieces that are emphasized over and over, the compressed notes. And then in section 3 there, that's for after the class, where you can summarize the key pieces that were covered from the lecture that are on that page. Here you'll see a week note structure. And I want you to pause and consider, why is this week? The other thing that I would suggest asking yourself is, how would I improve this note structure? Something to consider before we move to the next slide is that when we are structuring our notes, having that organized fashion, we begin to see connections. It also allows us to take in a heavy volume of material and break it down so that we can understand the information, we can learn, it's easier to find. Notes in a structured fashion is one of the biggest improvements or ways to improve your marks. So considering, okay, this is a week structure, how can I improve this? Here you will see the same information as was on the previous slide. And here the content is entered into that Cornell system. So you can see on the left-hand side, the Q column that's where, the questions are posed. Who is Bach? Who is Handel? And that information may have been pulled from a course outline because on October 8th, 2019, the lecture is on those two musicians. That information may have been pulled from the slide decks that your professor had provided you, and that those are the main things that are going to be discussed for the lecture today. And then on the right-hand side is more detailed, the information that was jotted down during lecture, the information that was emphasized, the information that was key to the lesson. That information was written down there on the right-hand side in the record section of the Cornell system for your learning during that lecture. If the thought of using the Cornell system of notes and that structure doesn't feel great for you, that it's not going to work, here we just have another suggested structure. So on the right, that's the information that you'll take down from lecture. And as you go back to review your notes, then on the left side, that's where you can make those summary notes and build that for the semester. Here are a few options, ways for you to use your notes or, different structures to notes as a self-testing option. So this one here, the mapping method in the course, in an ecology course, it gives you the big picture, right? So if ecology is the course, sometimes the structure of the notes, or as you create summary notes, that next column in that has behavior, population, community, ecosystem, those might be different topics that were talked about in a lecture. So behavior being a lecture theme, and then you can create that ongoing web about behavior. Maybe population was the next lecture topic, and then we can jot down those key concepts of population, and etc., etc. So this is a great way for you to see the big picture of the course. It allows you to add new topics after each lecture so that it's an easy way for you to review. Another review option here is the charting method, or a way for you to take your summary notes and jot them down into a chart format. If you're unsure of when to use a chart, really thinking if there's similar groupings or categories that you are exploring in your lecture or within the course, then the chart, you can look at those concepts by asking, like, does this explain how two or more persons, things, places, they're similar, they're different? And so, the schools of psychology, that's a common example that you can use for the charting method. There are many more, but by asking yourself, are there more than one groupings of things, concepts that I'm looking at? And are we considering how they're similar or different? That's a great way to start and ask yourself, would using a chart be helpful?